Forward. Thank you for all joining us here today in this beautiful autumn day here at the Danbury Library. I know with the pandemic, the last few years, we kind of went to all virtual and somewhat hybrid. So we were trying to have this as a sort of in-person day here at the library for MUFON, but some folks got overbooked and everything, but we promised to make it up to you next year. So Michael Panicello, our executive director for Connecticut MUFON, is here today via Zoom. He has a wonderful presentation for you all today. So please give a big round of applause for Michael. And thank you so much for making this another wonderful conference here at the Danbury Library. So Michael,
thank you.
You have the con, sir.
Thank you. So I apologize for not being there in person. I had all intention of being there in person, but I overbooked myself. So I am the one that is ruining MUFON Day. You can blame me for that. I apologize. Next year I will be in person and we'll have a very nice MUFON Day. I'll bring all kinds of swag and stuff you guys can see and experiment with. This is my favorite time of year. I really look forward to this conference. It's a lot of fun. I was lucky enough to be involved with it since its inception, and you have done a great job, Aurelio, in making this a massively successful conference over the years. So congratulations to you. Today I'm going to talk about USOs, underwater submersible objects. It's one of the least known fields in ufology, I think, personally. So that's my own opinion. I think that there is a lot in this particular branch. So I kind of started recently looking more into this. And next year, I'm going to present another USO case study, a lot more in detail than what I'm doing this year. So a little tease for next year, but hopefully you get an idea of the field that is underwater submersible objects today. And if you have any questions, ask me, or you have my email on the screen. Just shoot me an email, or you can go to our website. It's also on the screen, and I'll be happy to respond to you that way. All right, so let's dive in, shall we? Ridicule is not part of the scientific method, and people should not be taught that it is. This is by a man named J. Allen Hynek. I start every lecture I ever do on UFOs or ufology with this particular quote. And the reason is that ufologists, we're often ridiculed. We're the people with the tinfoil hats. We're the people that look for conspiracies where there are no conspiracies. At least that's what people like to think. And that's not really the case. I mean, sure, you have people out in left field. You have a fringe element within the field. But 90% of who we are as investigators in this field, we do try to present our evidence in a very scientific and concise and direct manner. And people don't listen to us because they immediately dismiss us, they ridicule us, and that's not how science works. And we like to think of ourselves as trying to be scientific. J. Allen Hynek is the grandfather, in my opinion, of modern day ufology, of bringing the scientific method to the field. J. Allen Hynek worked for Project Blue Book. He was originally brought in as a debunker to try and justify everything that was being reported in Project Blue Book to be man-made objects or identifiable objects or natural phenomenon. But he saw so much that he couldn't identify that he actually became a believer in the field, and he left Project Blue Book and started a organization called Center for UFO Studies, which was out in Chicago, and they still are in existence today to some degree. They still have a website if you want to go and visit it. But so what I ask of you is, when you listen to this PowerPoint presentation today, is don't look at it with the skeptical mind or ridicule it. Look at it with an open mind and open opinions, and see the evidence that I'm going to present to you today. And this is another quote that I like about that Allen Hynek said. I think it's poignant. All right, so what am I going to talk about today? To be honest with you, I got very overwhelmed in making this PowerPoint presentation. There is so much information on USOs, and there's so many directions you can go into. There you can go into regions, different regions of UFO sightings. Like you can look at the broader picture. But what I wanted to do for this particular this PowerPoint in this lecture was to give you a little bit of everything. I tried to show what we have in existence today to justify that there might be the technology exists for man-made objects underwater now. In fact, it existed in the 60s. But I also wanted to show you some of the major hotspots, some of the more famous USO sightings. So this particular PowerPoint today is going to be a little bit of everything. We're going to go through it really fast because I only have an hour, and I do want to try and stay on schedule for Aurelio. And I am going to provide you with some books if you want to look at this yourself. If you want to dive into this field yourself and you want to dip your toes into it, since we are in a library, maybe they can order these books for you. But if not, you can get them online. They're cheap. Most of them are somewhat out of print, so you can get them used at any bookstore or any online used bookstore. It's fine. I always think it's important when you give a PowerPoint presentation or a lecture or anything is to state your credentials, because what makes me credible? Like what do I have that's any different from anyone else to come up here and talk to you about this field? So my background, here's a little bit of who I am as a ufologist. I've been in MUFON since 2012. I started as a field investigator, then I became a state section director, and in 2013 I became the state director of Connecticut. I work as part of the MUFON STAR team. They're the ones that if there's a major case in Connecticut or anywhere in the region, would be the ones that would go out and investigate it. So for example, if any of you have a crashed UFO little saucer in your backyard, send me an email, really, please, that'd be great. And we'll be the ones that will come out to look at that particular object. I was part of CAG International, which is Case Assistance Group, which is we investigate cases all over the world. I always like to tell the story of I did a case in Iran through email and later through Zoom. So I'm sure some NSA person probably enjoyed listening to that conversation, but I thought it was kind of fun. And so that's my little claim to fame on that, I guess. And I've been looking into this field on my own for 20 years. Who is MUFON Connecticut? Connecticut MUFON began in 1969 as the Midwest UFO Network. From there, we branched out into all 50 states. We're overseas. We have chapters in France and Canada, Australia. MUFON started as a result of Project Blue Book. I actually have a T-shirt that's from MUFON that says "Doing the Air Force's Job Since 1969." I would next year when I come in person, I'll wear it for you all so you can see it. They didn't like the Condon report, the founders of MUFON, and so they wanted to continue on. MUFON Connecticut, I should update that slide, has been around since 2013. We started off as the the New England Conference, which actually, if you think about it, our chapter was everything in New England, which is huge. You can't really accomplish anything. So about 8 years ago, they broke it down, they put it back into individual states, and then we were born. We do a monthly meeting the first Saturday every month up in Windsor Locks. I always think it's kind of cheeky. You know, we meet by the airport, right by Bradley International Airport. So you have this UFO organization meeting by an airport. I don't know. I think it's kind of fun. We do sky watches in the warmer weather. We do outings where we go to different hotspots in the area. We actually did one just recently going over to Sheffield, Mass, the Tom Reed UFO Park. So I think if some of you saw his lecture that he gave to the conference recently, we were up there. We run a ham radio net. So those of you that are ham radio people, reach out to me because we are looking for more hams to get involved with MUFON. So let's dive right into this. So this is from Project Blue Book. According to Dr. Hynek, the official number of reports in the project were 13,134. Of that, 623 cases were reported in the Atlantic and Pacific, including reports from ships and aircraft. So we had, of the 13,000 reported cases in Project Blue Book, 623 cases were of USOs. Of that, 258 cases were ships where they saw something, and 365 were air visual cases. And then you can see, you can break them down by region, Pacific, Atlantic, and then airplanes by Pacific and Atlantic. So there's a lot of sightings. This is not something that's very isolated. Today, 1 in 5 UFO sightings involve water in some way. According to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, less than 5% of the underwater surface has been explored. Now think about that. 5%, that's extremely low. We don't know what's in our oceans. And that's a whole new frontier to go and explore, but it's a great hiding spot for USOs because a lot of it is deep. A lot of the ocean is on a, we need little submersibles to go there. We can't send big submarines down sometimes that depth, except for the little ones. So we're very limited on our exploration ability. So if you were an alien species or civilization and you were coming to our planet, you can hide in the land. But if you're going to have some kind of established base, there's only, most of the land has been explored, but the oceans is a perfect environment for that. And so it seems like, to me, this is a great promising area to look into for UFO sightings. I always say the other best place to look into for UFO sightings, or at least evidence of UFOs visiting Earth, is the ancient aliens, just because of the technology level that, what we can do at that period compared to what we see. Since Project Blue Book, the number of USO sightings are in the thousands. I could give you hundreds of case studies of different UFOs today, and we'll be here until the evening. But this is amazing when I started diving into this, of how rich a field this USOs really are. So do they exist? Are they ours or are they theirs? I get this question a lot when I do UFO presentations on just the stuff in the sky, and people say, are they truly extraterrestrial? And I say, well, we have a lot of technology as humans. We have a lot of classified materials. We have a lot of classified aircraft, and they're flying around in our skies. They're being tested. They're being developed. And some of them are ours, like the U-2, the F-117, the B-2. All of these aircraft were at one time were classified, and they were reported as UFOs until they became declassified. So can what we're seeing in our oceans be ours? Could we have the ability to have bases underwater? And the answer is yes. And the document you're seeing online, Man-Made Undersea Structures, is from, well, you can read it. This is from the Army Corps of Engineers. This document is a document that shows that there is the ability to create large undersea installations with a short sleeve environment. And this document, this report, was written in the 1960s. There was another study that was called, the study was titled Feasibility of Manned In-Bottom Bases. Dr. Ivan Sanderson, which is a book I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation, wrote that it suggested aliens could remain undetected by building their bases beneath the world's oceans, which is what I said earlier. It's a great place to hide. But this document in the 1960s, and if you read through it, you can get it online. And if you want the PDF of it, send me an email and I'll send you the PDF of this particular document. It talks about how using pump systems and pumping in oxygen and creating oxygen, just the heat of the Earth's core can make this a very comfortable environment. So it is possible in theory and maybe in practice, that somewhere in our oceans, either the United States or some kind of base, there is a base that is like a bond layer underwater. Maybe, I don't know, but it's really interesting to think that that's possible. There's also not just this report, but there's several other Army Corps of Engineer papers that discuss pressurization, the ability to pressurize underwater bases for human habitation. And if you want those PDFs, again, just email me and I'll send you them. So you can see that within our own ability as for technology in the 1960s and going forward, we have the ability, or at least in theory, to build underwater bases. So if we can do it, making the assumption that aliens who has the ability to travel intergalactically or throughout the universe can do it, is a pretty simple leap, in my opinion. This is by a Russian ufologist, who also says that it does make sense that there is some kind of base underwater that we created. Again, this is another report. This is from the book Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. It's a great book. It uses a lot of primary sources. And as you read through this, you can see that there is, again, the possibility. And if you read the long statement in bold, it's a super secret back, well, I'm using the word super secret, but it's a secret back budget program. And it's, looking at engineering and industrial literature, this also makes sense too, that they do talk about this as a possibility of something that we can do at our own technological level. And if you want more on underground bases, I can always give you a PowerPoint on that. It's very well known that there's a lot of underground bases on the planet, not just by the US, but by other countries. So this is, having these secret places is not something that's without the reality of possibilities. All right, our level of technology. Now, one of the things about USOs is people report that they are moving very, very, very fast. They seem to just move through the water like they're cutting butter. It's like a hot knife through butter. That's my analogy, but they move fast. They don't have any kind of resistance when they're moving. They can turn very quickly. They go in and out of the water without any kind of difficulty. They sometimes don't even make a splash when they go into the water. They just go right into the water as if there's nothing there. So if any of you ever seen a diver going off a high diving board and they have the little wake or a little splash, that's what they want when you dive, a little splash, but sometimes you see them do big splashes. It's all about the angle in which you go in. But what kind of technology do we have that can move very fast? Well, I don't know what's in the classified world. Maybe some of you in the audience here worked in the classified world and you would know that we have more advanced technology than we're letting on. But in the unclassified world, one thing that we have is supercavitation. For a while, this was classified, and now it's no longer. So if you look at these pictures, it kind of gives you a little definition of what supercavitation is using bubbles. And fun fact for you, some of the newest cruise ships actually put out little bubbles under their hull for cavitation so that they can have better fuel efficiency. So now this technology is moving into commercial use with cruise ships. So the next time you're on one of the modern cruise ships, like Royal Caribbean's new ships, or the other one, I think is the Carnival one, your ship might be running on a little bubbles of air. I just still have a propeller, but you get my point. Okay, so our subs are reported to go as deep as 1,600 feet and have speeds between 20 and 30 knots, depending on what you read. Again, this is what is reported. This is not what is classified. Our ability to go further than that, to depths much larger, require smaller submersibles or unmanned submersibles. That's our current technology. And the same thing with speeds, unless you're looking at supercavitation, and then you can go a lot faster. But USOs are reported to go much, much faster than 35 knots. They reported going sometimes hundreds of knots. They can move and turn much faster than ours. Like when submarines turn, a Virginia or an Ohio class submarine or a Seawolf, they're our most advanced subs right now. They don't turn on a dime. They take a while to turn, just like our aircraft. They don't, if you watch a fighter jet or even a commercial jet turn in the sky, it's a long and slow process. You know, USOs, they turn very quickly, they're reported, almost like at a 90-degree angle. So our ability to mimic that is limited in our current technology that is unclassified. And I keep saying unclassified because we don't know what's in the classified world. Now, tomorrow, you're going to have a presentation, I believe, of someone who is going to talk to you a little bit about advanced technology. But so maybe this is a little teaser for you. We know that the US has specialty subs that can go much deeper. So the military and the Navy do have subs that can go much, much deeper. But again, they don't move, they don't go as deep as what these reports are. And even sonar reports by submarines show that these craft are much, much deeper than what our known ability is. Unclassified. All right, so what is a USO? So that's our technology. Let's go into what is a USO. Characteristics of a USO in water. Like I said, people are often reporting these on various naval ships. They're tracking USOs at depths of thousands of feet or deeper. Our current level of technology does not allow that we know of. And often there's no noise or no engine noise reported to them. They are very sleek looking. You know, they don't have a lot of appendages. They're usually very smooth outer surfaces. They don't have, you know, traditional looking submarine characteristics. Like if you've seen our submarines, they have a conning tower and they have fins sticking out either side for their dive plates. But USOs don't usually report that they have those kind of physical characteristics. So again, that's different from what our technology can allow. There's no wake produced by the craft when they're moving through the water. There's no splash as the object goes in and out of the water. And there's no really specific area where you often only see USOs. They're seen in the deep water. They're seen and reported in coastal waters, rivers, even lakes. Connecticut MUFON had a case, and I'll talk about this a little later, of a UFO involved in sucking up water from a lake. So lakes are very common with UFOs, but there are also reports of USOs coming out of the lakes and going into the lakes. So one of the most famous areas for UFO sightings, and for those of you that like movies, there is a new movie that just came out a few years ago about looking at USOs over Catalina Island. There's a book by Preston Denton who goes into Catalina Island very, very well. And again, that's at the end of this PowerPoint in my books list. So maybe your library can get that for you. Catalina Island is about 28 miles off the mainland of California, right around LA. It has a 54-mile perimeter. There's ocean depths that reach around 3,000 feet between the island and the mainland. And witnesses often see discs, cigar-shaped crafts rising from the water. There's also lights such as orbs that have been reported around this area. And a few years ago, for those of you that follow the news, you might remember that there was reports of an underwater UFO base being spotted here with Google Earth. I don't know if any of you remember that, but that was pretty popular a couple of years ago. Here's a sighting example. I'm only going to give you one sighting example for this, only because there's hundreds of them you can go, and I want to keep moving through this PowerPoint. This one was in 1947. So again, going back to my earlier point about ancient aliens, when you start going backwards in time to periods when you know our technology was not that advanced, like 1947, yes, we had submarines. They were involved in World War II. They couldn't dive very deep compared to modern day subs. They didn't move as fast as modern day subs. They looked very different from modern day subs. Yet there are sightings of these kind of underwater objects. So when you look at the technology at the time, can that technology replicate what the sighting was? And in my opinion, we can't replicate what was being seen in the 1940s. And I think that's to be said with a lot of the UFO sightings too. As you go back and our technology level as a civilization decreases, but the sightings that are being seen are so much more advanced, and you have to wonder to yourself, well, if we can't replicate this ourselves, how can you say it's an IFO, a man-made object, identified flying object that's man-made, if our known technology cannot do this? And the same goes, in my opinion, for USOs. If we're having these sightings in the 1940s of these advanced kind of objects, and we know what our aircraft looked like back then. They were piston engine aircraft. This talks about a flying disc. We didn't have flying discs in the 1940s. Known that was unclassified. Then how can we report this as something that is not unknown? Another pretty popular area is Puerto Rico. It's part of the Bermuda Triangle. The Puerto Rico Trench is reported with a lot of UFO sightings and USO sightings. So this is a real hotbed of an area. There is a naval test range around Puerto Rico. I think it might have been declassified. I mean, decommissioned, but I'm not entirely sure on that. Was classified military equipment being tested. There was a radio telescope there at the time. It's no longer active, and in fact, it's destroyed because the antenna fell onto the base of it and put a hole in it. But could the aliens have been looking at our technology for radio telescopes? We don't know. But there was a lot of UFO sightings and USO sightings at this period of time in this location, and they're still going on today. You can look at the National UFO Reporting Center, or you can look at MUFON. If you're a member of the MUFON organization, you can get access to our cases and go to Puerto Rico in the search box, and you can see many, many, many sightings there. In 2013, this was a very famous sighting that came out around Puerto Rico. This object was moving all over the airspace for about 3 minutes. It was investigated by the Scientific Coalition for Ufology. It was shot from a helicopter from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The object moves very quickly around the islands, airport islands, and over the water. The object then descends into the water at extreme speeds. When it comes back out of the water, there are two objects. So again, what is this? Is this our technology? Yes. And I found some, maybe. Is it? And I found some sources for next year's PowerPoint that might show you that what this could have been. But I'm not really sure yet, so I haven't put it in today's presentation. Or could this be an unknown, truly alien craft? Maybe. I don't know. But this was very famous. It made the national news. It circulated all over the internet, and all kinds of different theories were come out on what this could be or what this might be. And I think, since then we've had the Tic Tac UFOs and that. And again, next year you'll have more information on that, but I wasn't ready yet to present the sources. Another one that I think is very interesting, that's a very good, well-documented event, is the Shag Harbor. For those of you that are familiar with it, this is in Canada. It made the local headlines. I personally think and agree with the statement I heard that the amount of government documents, police records, witnesses make this Canada's best documented UFO cases. And there are a lot of documents on this. There's a lot of government documents. I'm going to show you some of them. And there's some police records and a lot of witness statements. So you'll see some of them. I have heard that this is Canada's version of Roswell. I'm not sure of this, but I guess it's possible. I do think that it is definitely a well-documented case and probably their best. So this happened around 11 p.m. on October 4th, 1969. The craft was first seen when into the water. It was assumed to be a commercial or private plane, and then a search and rescue was started. Once it became clear this was a UFO, quote, a UFO, the government and military took over. Multiple military witnesses said off the record that the object was a UFO. Witness statements of people involved in this search said there were two objects. One came later, perhaps to help the downed craft. So basically what this was, in a nutshell, is a craft was spotted on the bottom of the ocean. It was sitting there for a while. People saw it go into the water. They thought it was initially a commercial aircraft. Once they realized it wasn't, it was taken over by the military. Another craft came later through the water and over to it. Maybe it was like calling AAA for help. Hey, I have a broken, anti-grav system. I need a tow, or I need spare parts. They were there for a few days, then both craft leave. The report said the craft was about 60 feet long. Witnesses reported seeing a string of flashing lights on the object. Multiple witnesses saw this craft both flying in the air and then flying into the water. So this was the original craft. It was first seen in the air with multiple lights, and then it went into the water. An underwater search was conducted by the Canadian authorities to look for the craft and/or evidence or wreckage. This actually made the Condon report. This was event case number 34 in Project Blue Book, or the Condon report. So the Condon report is the report that closed Project Blue Book. As I said earlier, it's also what kind of led to MUFON being created. But this is a very interesting case, the fact that you have what looks like some kind of intelligent motion of these craft. One was down, another one came underwater and parked next to it. Both were there for a few hours, a couple of days, and then they left. So a very deliberate action by these craft. So here are two documents. The first one, the RCMP UFO report from the Smith brothers, says that reports 16 unidentified lights, estimated speed of the lights, spread of the lights to be 50 to 60 feet apart. On 4 occasions, the lights, which were bright red and as bright as local buoy lights, went off in sequence from back to front. Then they were lit in sequence from front to back. So in case you can't read it, this is what they're saying. The red lights watched for 7 to 8 minutes. They watched the red lights for 7 to 8 minutes, and then they were extinguished. Then once they were extinguished, yellow, orange lights appeared, and then they disappeared over the horizon to the northwest. And they observed this for about 10 minutes. The police officer, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, reported that the witnesses were sober and sincere. Sighting was also reported by the Royal Canadian Air Force Base, Bacoor. They did not report anything on radar that night, but there was no known Air Force operations in the area. The final report by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police suggested that government personnel interview the persons concerned above and those sightings on the 4th of October, 1967. The next report is from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police by a captain. And this report cites the following. It is a report of October 7th, 1967. On this date, a request was received from the Halifax Subdivision Section to contact Lee Howard Mestel of the JB Nickerson, which is the name of the craft, the watercraft, related to his sighting of a flying object off Samber Light on October 4th, 1967. It was further requested that the results of the inquiries be forwarded to Bragton Passage Section in view of a similar sighting in that area. The sighting happened at 9 p.m. on October 4th, where he noticed an object with 3 flashing red lights. Radar indicated this object to be 16 miles away. Witness reported it was a very clear night, and we, meaning his crew and him, could see the lights off Halifax. At the time, our boat was 32 miles south of the Sambre Light, and the object was approximately 16 miles northeast of us. I would say the object was 16 miles southeast of Sambre Light, end quote. At the time, the Navy, they did a lot of practicing in the area. At the same time, there were 3 other objects on radar about 6 miles from the first object. Quote, I would say it disappeared about 11 p.m. when it went up in the air, end quote. Could not see any shape or form because of the distance. When it went into the air, it only had 1 flashing light. When the object was on the water or close to the water, it had 3 bright flashing red lights. And he also says later that all the lights on it were red. Could not see any lights on the other 3 objects as they were only appearing on the radar. It was not unusual to see Navy or aircraft drop things into the water during this period of time. I had not seen anything like that before, quote, but it sounds, quote again, but it sounds like things they are looking for down off Selburne or Barberton Passage, end quote. When the object left, it went straight up in the air and only 1 red light. The captain considered this to be a reliable type individual and bears good reputation in his community. So those are 2 examples of the many different witness reportings and the police reports that followed up on this particular event. These are government documents on the Shag Harbor sighting. The first one, message form, was a reference to a UFO report investigation. And it says consideration should be given for an underwater search of the area ASAP. Document 2, which is the middle document on the screen, 1 diving officer and 3 men to conduct investigation of object reported by Royal Canadian Mountain Police in the vicinity of the region mentioned in the reports. And document 3, the far one, is a Royal Canadian Mountain Police corporal from Bragton Passage, saw 3 objects in the time interval approximately 5 minutes that flew down to the water surface, floated and sank. The flying object was described as being in excess of 60 feet in diameter, carrying 4 white lights spaced horizontally at a distance of 15 feet. The objects flying in an easterly direction when first sighted, then it descended rapidly into the water and produced a bright flash on impact. One light remained on the surface for a considerable time, but sank before a boat could reach it. So these are just some of the many government documents on this Shag Harbor sighting. So UFOs are going back hundreds of years. You watch any Ancient Alien television show will tell you that. USOs also go back that long. Christopher Columbus actually reported seeing a USO during his voyage over to the Americas. And in his diary, he wrote about 10 p.m. on October 11th, 1492. It was reported in his journal. He described the UFO as a small wax candle that lifted off the water and went up. Others on the ship wintered this, including his son. So again, like with Ancient Aliens, when you look at the technology at the time, can they replicate that? No. Is that really what he saw? Well, you know, it's a historical case. We can't interview him, but it's interesting to note. So that's why I put it here. The military has had a lot of sightings, and as I said, some of them was reported. So here is one, and this was on February 7th, 1945. The radar picked up the bogey at 30,000 feet. Object was at a great distance, at a great speed. Fighter planes could not close the distance. So again, 1945, we had piston aircraft. They didn't go very fast. We had the bombers that could go high, but they couldn't intercept this aircraft. Another one, this is another military sighting. This was from a Canadian destroyer of 2 objects reported on their radar. It was 40 officers and crew members of the destroyer saw the saucers the night of July 10th. The object disappeared before dawn. Here's another one. Flying saucers popped up in Korea and Japan. Oh, here it is. This was in the Gulf of Alaska. Here's one in Norway. So as I said, USOs are not just be in North America with Canadians and the United States. They're seen all over the world. Here's one in Brazil. In 1980. And if I'm going too fast and you can't read these, let me know and I'll slow down. Here's one in Norway.
If you want to slow down a little bit, Michael.
Sure. Should I go back?
No, that's okay.
Here's a MUFON case. I know this is very small, so let me read it to you. It says, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I was a Marine on fence line duty All of us Marines were amazed at the amount of UFO activity over and around this base. Let me, this I can't see. Virtually every night, UFOs were flying overhead with an altitude of less than 300 feet. Most of these UFOs were approximately 50 to 100 feet across, but to the naked eye, they came off as dull, hazy hull with a small red light trailing behind it. When I stood guard duty on the south side of the base, I witnessed on many, many nights UFOs landing and taking off out of the ocean. They were large blue lights moving around after they after their landing in the ocean, then slowly dimmed down as they obviously descended deeper. Now the most exciting event came when I stood guard duty at the main base. It was approximately 7 p.m. dark when I stepped out of the guard shack and looked across the fence at the deserted Cuban guardhouse when something caught my eye. Behind the Cuban guard shack near the ground was a huge white cloud with a blue/white baby blue pulsating light in the middle of it. I asked my partner to verify what I was seeing because now it had risen up and over the Cuban shack, heading for us. Just then, the observation tower called us and was yelling to get the hell out of there. By this time, it was too late because the UFO was now above me and my partner. There was no noise at all, just this big, beautiful white cloud with a blue-white pulsating light. We stood there for several minutes looking at it. Then the sergeant of the guard ordered us to leave the guard shack. We walked to the barracks, which is on a hill about 200 feet away, where we could observe from a safe distance. Base intelligence arrived with a crew of people who began filming this UFO, which lasted about 3 hours before moving west down the fence line. The UFO traveled a quarter of a mile, then stopped for a moment, then, like a bullet, shot straight into the air until it disappeared. I would love to go back just to see the UFO are still showing up. The dates that I put down is a shot in the dark because it was over 50 years ago. So you have a lot of UFOs coming and going from the Guantanamo Bay area. So Russia has done a lot of research into USOs. 50% of UFO encounters are connected with oceans. 50% more with lakes, so UFOs tend to stick to the water, said one Russian officer. Their most famous encounter with in Russia with underwater USOs is actually an entity case. This happened at this particular lake. The lake is about 350 miles, 395 miles in length. Width is about 49 miles. The average depth is 2,442 feet. Maximum depth is 5,387 feet. It was reported by the Russians that mystery swimmers were almost 3 meters tall. They were very human-like. So actually the background to this is that the Russian Navy, they're frogmen, they're underwater soldiers, were doing a training at this lake. They went into the water and they were doing their training when they saw these mystery swimmers approaching them. They were estimated to be 3 meters tall and very human-like. Now, the water was very cold, but these particular creatures did not seem affected by the cold water. They were reported to be about 50 meters into the lake, so their depth was about 50 meters. The swimmers were reported that they were wearing tight-fitting silver-like swimsuits with no apparent scuba diving equipment. So again, remember what I said to you about the technology. Our scuba divers, and any of you in the audience today who are scuba divers, I grew up around scuba divers. I am not a scuba diver, but you have a lot of equipment. You have a tank, you have a regulator, you have a vest, a VC, you have all of the gauges, you have your fins, mask, snorkel. You have a lot of equipment when you're going into the water to scuba dive. They did not have any of this. They only had a a sphere-like helmet on their heads. So you could say, well, we have dive helmets, they're like little hard hats. True. And they could have, but usually those have a cord coming out of them to pump in oxygen. They did not report any cords going into them. So again, the technology level is different. We have dry suits today. Maybe this was one of their dry suits. A dry suit just blows in air into your vest. It works for very cold water. You can wear regular clothes under it. You don't need a wetsuit. So when you get out of a dry suit, you're just that. You're completely dry. Maybe that's what this was. Again, that's similar to our technology, but they didn't really match and they were unknown. So the local military leader at the time was notified of these creatures, and he wanted to go capture one of them. So he sent the frogmen back into the water, and they used a net to try and capture one of them. But some kind of energy beam, some kind of energy pulse threw the entire group out of the water to the surface. Now, when you go deep in diving, you have to slowly come up, because if you don't, you get the bends. The bends is a term that divers use for when you go down deep, you have oxygen and nitrogen in your body. You have more of it when you're using compressed air, but the nitrogen comes out of your body as you go deeper. And as you go up, you need time for the oxygen to absorb back into your body. Otherwise, if you go up too fast, it stays as little bubbles. And then these little bubbles get into your joints and tissues, and it makes you bend over, and it hurts you, and it makes you double over, which is where the acronym BENDS come, the name BENDS comes from, because you're bending over. So when you're ascending the ocean from deep, you have to go up slowly. But what happened in this particular case is that the energy pulse pushed them out of the water so quickly that all these divers got the bends. The nearest decompression chamber, which is the only way to kind of reverse this, is you immediately try and get the person into a decompression chamber, bring them down to the depth that they were at, and then slowly bring them to normal depth pressure. So like they would have done in the ocean, but didn't. They found one, it was small, and they put some of them in there, but unfortunately, due to the technology or whatever, I don't know how you want to phrase it, 4 of them died. The rest became invalids as a result of this. There was another lake in the area called Ishiku Lake, and that also reported having these strange creatures in it. Later, there was a report done by the Russian Ministry of Defense that came out that said a lot of the Russian lakes in the area that were deep also reported having these mystery swimmers in them. So not only were these creatures living in this one lake, but this is the most famous of their sightings, they were found in multiple lakes throughout the Russian area. So who were they? What were they? No one knows. At least nothing that's come out in public to my knowledge of what these creatures were. But this is a pretty famous case, and you can find it all over the internet. And it's one that's always often pointed to when you're talking about USO sightings, especially the fact that these actually involve creatures that have yet to been identified to my knowledge. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, MUFON, Connecticut had a case similar to this, where we had a case, it was in
Michael,
Colch. Yeah.
what year did this take place?
I'm sorry, summer of 1982.
Thank you.
So MUFON, Connecticut had something similar to this with a UFO. We didn't have a creature per se at that event. It was a later event. It was a witness saw an object, a sphere craft, silver in nature, in his backyard. When he went to look at this, it was by a little lake. It was hovering above the water. The local resident state trooper came out at the time. He called them, and the two of them were looking at this particular object. When they thought they were only looking at it for a few minutes, but when they came out of that environment, they were going back to their car for the trooper for the house, they realized that 2 hours of missing time had occurred. Later on, the witness reported seeing a shadow person when he was in the woods once. So not exactly the same, but it's pretty interesting. You have the water, you have the missing time, you have the craft and an unknown entity. So this is a little more about it. And this is a little more. And this is another USO sighting in Russia. And I'll give you a pause to read this. This is another USO sighting in Russia. And at the end, books. So if you want to look more into USOs, I would recommend some of these books. Invisible Residence is, I would suggest getting that first. And the reason is this individual is really, from everything I've read about USOs, this individual is kind of the one who started the field and is the foremost expert in the field. But all of these books will give you a good foundation of USOs, and then from there you can go on and read other books. So this is page 1 of 2, and if you want these books, you can, like I said, try your local library. Most of them are old enough that you can get them pretty cheap online or at maybe your local used bookstore. Obviously, Amazon sells it. Amazon sells everything. You can probably just get anything you want on Amazon nowadays. But and then these other books. This is that Preston Denton books that I was telling you about, Undersea UFO Base. If you want to learn a little bit more about Catalina Island and the USOs that are around Catalina Island, along with that base that they reported that being in that area. UFOs and Water, that is a great book. That is just tons and tons and tons and tons of sighting reports. It's out of print, so you'd have to get that probably somewhere off the internet. But all of these are great books that look at primary sources or witness testimony. So if you're going to do your research, you always want to go for the primary sources, the original documents. If you noticed in a lot of my slides, I gave the source for where it was. It's usually the best way to go. Get your own, and then form your own opinions from there. And then right on time, 11:30, I am done. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, Michael, Brian. I read a book by Paul Stonehill and Philip Mantle about Russian USOs. I wonder if you read any of Paul Stonehill's work. It's not primary sources though.
Yeah, yep, I got a book. I know my background is, but I'm actually holding it right now. It has a little lighthouse on it with a UFO titled Russia's UFO Secrets, Unidentified Submersible Objects in Russia and International Waters. It's an excellent book. It would be a good book to add to your collection, I think. I enjoy it very much.
We have a couple of other, just a couple more questions, and then we'll move on to our next presenter. Go ahead.
Are there any USO sightings over Connecticut or in the Connecticut coast?
Thanks.
I lived in Milford, right around the harbor, and there were always UFO sightings. That was quite a hot spot. In the 1970s, early 80s.
There are
Go ahead, Mike.
There are a few, but not as many as we would like. There's a couple older ones, but for modern ones, since like 2013 on, I only investigated one USO sighting. And then upon investigation into that, it turned out to be a bird, an osprey. So we haven't had any modern ones that come in the last few years. But that being said, I would love them to come in. So if you know any, or if you have any that you have, even if they're historical, please fill out one of our sighting reports so we can at least document that, because the sound, it's a very popular water area, and so you would think that people would see things on there, but we don't get as many as you would suspect.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Mark Antonio. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. I wish you were here. I missed you.
I'll be there next year.
Excellent. I wanted to mention there is at least one USO sighting that originated out of Groton. And that was the one that I had on a US submarine decades ago. Remember that story? I don't know if you remember me telling you that story or not. But
I do have, so I do, but I didn't. I figured since you were there, it wasn't my place to tell your story. So maybe you should tell it to everyone.
It's everybody's story. I don't mind. No, but it was cool. So everything, a lot of what Mike told you guys today dovetails with what I'm going to talk about too. So he's really got nice job, by the way, Mike. Congratulations. That was really good.
Thank you.
We got one more, Ed?
Yeah, one more question, Mike, before we let you be for the rest of the day. That's okay.
Has anyone tried to see if there's any correlation between these UFO sightings and ley lines?
I didn't hear what the question was.
Is there any correlation between these UFOs, USOs, and ley lines?
Great question. I have not looked into that, but I am going to do a much better presentation next year, so I'll have a year to look into that, and I'm going to write that question down. So come back next year and I'll give you an answer.
Great. I'll try to stick around, Mike.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a busy day. So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And until next time, everyone, stick around for Mark D'Antonio's presentation. Michael, thank you. We'll see you next year.
See you next year.